She was a volcano of ideas. We hope to excavate, to know more about her plans, about herself, her dynasty.
For centuries, Queen Hatshepsut, Egypt's most powerful woman to ever rule as pharaoh, simply vanished. Her statues were smashed, her name carved out of stone, and her tomb found empty. No one knew where her body went, or why her memory had been erased. But inside a forgotten vault beneath the Egyptian Museum, scientists uncovered a mummy sealed for more than 100 years.
The other important thing is the discovery of the name of Sinmut, the architect of Queen Hatshepsut, and also we found evidence that the name of Thutmose III.
When they decoded its DNA, the results stunned them. Hidden in her cells were secrets that rewrote how Egypt's most powerful queen lived, ruled, and died.
DNA testing is being done on a mummy identified as Hatshepsut's, but the cause of her death is unknown.
What they found buried in her blood was never meant to be discovered. The unearthed mystery. At the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, a group of researchers began a digital imaging project meant to catalog every unidentified mummy in storage. Among the thousands of files, one caught their attention. It was marked only as Unknown Female, 1903. The mummy had sat in a wooden case for decades, ignored since its excavation in the early 20th century. Under normal circumstances, it would have remained that way. But the team decided to scan it again, using new high-resolution CT technology to record its internal structure. They expected a routine image. Instead, what appeared on the monitor stopped them cold. The first images looked ordinary. The mummy's body was thickly coated in resin, making it difficult to see beneath the wrappings. No jewelry or inscriptions were visible. There was no name or royal cartouche, the oval frame that identified a pharaoh's name, and no record connecting her to any known burial. Then one of the technicians pointed to the screen. The skeleton's arms were crossed neatly over the chest. Dr. Naguib, the Egyptologist leading the study, recognized the pose immediately. It was the traditional posture of a pharaoh. The lab went quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. The team ran more scans, adjusting the imaging settings to reveal clearer details. The skeleton belonged to an older woman, estimated to be in her 50s. The bones showed joint damage and weight stress that suggested she had been unusually heavy, rare among royal mummies of that period. Her condition would have been difficult to conceal in life, which raised more questions. Was she truly royal, or someone imitating royal traditions? As the data processed, another detail caught their attention. One of her upper molars was missing, and the socket appeared clean, as though the tooth had been lost late in life or during mummification. The technicians took note. Dental patterns often provided the only verifiable link between unidentified mummies and separate relics preserved in museum collections. Whispers spread quietly through the room. Could this have been the remains of a royal woman erased from memory? The crossed arms suggested pharaonic status, yet the absence of royal markings or a coffin made no sense. It seemed impossible. A royal burial posture without a royal tomb. Some members of the team believed they might have been looking at one of Egypt's missing pharaohs, possibly a queen whose legacy had been deliberately removed. Others insisted it was too soon to say. Without proof, it could have been a noblewoman buried with unusual honors. The samples were sealed and catalogued. Every image was stored in multiple archives for comparison. Dr. Naguib decided to expand the search, requesting access to historical records of unlocated rulers from Egypt's 18th dynasty. Museum records later revealed that the mummy had originally been recovered from a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, catalogued in 1903 by a young British archaeologist named Howard Carter. Few took notice at the time, and the connection was eventually forgotten. To solve the mystery, the team began checking every record of Egypt's missing rulers, starting with the one queen whose body had never been found, a ruler whose name history had almost erased: the vanished pharaoh. At the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the same research team worked alongside a group of Egyptologists who specialized in ancient dynasties. Their goal was to trace the origins of the unidentified mummy found in storage. The scientists handed over the lab report containing the CT data and physical details to the historians, who began cross-referencing it with the records of missing royals. The process was slow and detailed, but one name kept appearing across the documents: Hatshepsut. The age, weight, and royal burial posture described in the scans aligned closely with her historical profile. The researchers realized that the data might fit Egypt's most elusive ruler. The deeper they read, the more they uncovered about her life. Hatshepsut was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I, a royal woman educated in religion, politics, and trade. When her husband Thutmose II died, she served as regent for his young son, Thutmose III. But within a few short years, the official records changed. She no longer appeared as caretaker, but as pharaoh in her own right. She adopted the throne name Matkare, meaning, "Truth is the soul of the sun god Ra." It was more than a royal title. It was a declaration that her rule came by divine choice. Hatshepsut claimed that the god Amun himself had chosen her to rule Egypt, making her kingship an act of destiny rather than ambition. Historical records described her as both visionary and daring. She dressed in the symbols of male authority, wearing the royal kilt and the ceremonial beard, but she never hid her identity as a woman. Her reign brought 2 decades of stability. She reopened trade routes, revived the temples of Karnak, and sent a famous expedition to the land of Punt. Egypt flourished under her leadership. Art and architecture reached new heights, and the empire's wealth expanded. Her rule was remembered as an age of prosperity, where peace replaced conquest. Then everything changed after her death. The monuments that once carried her name were defaced. Reliefs that depicted her as pharaoh were chipped away, replaced with new inscriptions honoring Thutmose III. Her statues were smashed or buried. Her tomb, which should have contained her body and treasures, was discovered centuries later with relics, but no mummy. The disappearance of her remains became one of Egypt's greatest mysteries. To trace her missing remains, the team began reviewing the notes of early explorers who once mapped unconfirmed tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The clues about Hatshepsut's disappearance pointed them toward one name in particular, a young British archaeologist who had worked in the valley more than a century earlier. His name was Howard Carter, and his field journal described a small sealed chamber, a tomb that had not been opened in decades, the hunt for the lost mummy. The research team studied Howard Carter's century-old field journal, its pages filled with faded sketches and handwritten notes. Among his records was an entry describing a small sealed chamber in the Valley of the Kings, a site he had catalogued as KV-60. The entry seemed routine, even dull, but one detail stood out. Inside, Carter had found 2 female mummies, one in a coffin inscribed for a royal nurse named Sitra-In, and another lying on the floor without a coffin or name. At the time, he considered it unimportant and moved on. But now the modern team realized this brief description could hold the key to one of Egypt's greatest mysteries. In his field notes, Carter described one mummy resting inside a wooden coffin inscribed with the name Sitra-In, a royal nurse known from other 18th dynasty inscriptions. The second woman lay directly on the stone floor, without a coffin or name. That small detail would later change history. For Carter, it seemed trivial, perhaps a servant or attendant. For modern Egyptologists, it raised questions. Why would a royal nurse be buried beside an uncoffined woman? The positioning was strange, and the pose of the second mummy's left arm, bent across her chest, was unusual. It resembled royal burials. Carter did not investigate further. Years later, the uncoffined woman was quietly removed from KV-60 during routine conservation work and transferred to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo for preservation. There, she was stored under the label Unknown Female 1903. Her origins faded from memory, and the connection to KV-60 was forgotten. That was the same body the Cairo team had recently scanned, the same figure whose arms were crossed in royal fashion and whose missing tooth had drawn so much attention. Now, as the investigation deepened, the Cairo scientists decided to re-examine KV-60 itself. Using Carter's original sketch maps and notes, they traced the forgotten tomb. Over 100 years of debris and flooding had buried its entrance. Workers cleared the sand under the supervision of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. The air grew heavy as the stone steps reappeared for the first time in a century. When the team entered the chamber, they found it nearly identical to Carter's report. The coffin of Sitra-In still rested in place, covered in a layer of dust. The space where the second mummy once lay was now empty, but the imprint of the wooden board remained visible on the floor. The investigators documented everything: measurements, photographs, soil samples. According to reports from the team, the room felt untouched, as though the ancient burial had been waiting for someone to return. The Cairo team transported new samples and photographs back to the museum for comparison. Their next task was to find an object that could definitively link the mummy to the queen herself. As they began sorting through long-stored relics, curators discovered a small wooden box bearing Hatshepsut's royal cartouche. The box and the tooth. According to staff records, one of the technicians noticed a small cedar box that had gone mostly unnoticed in earlier audits. The inscription on its surface stopped her immediately. Burned into the aged wood was a royal cartouche bearing the name of Hatshepsut. The label read simply, "Royal Box, Valley of the Kings, 1903." It was the same year Carter had documented the forgotten tomb. Under controlled conditions, the box was opened for the first time in years. Inside were two objects. The first was a small, shriveled organ fragment preserved in resin. The second was a single human molar, still coated with embalming material. The team took high-resolution images and noted every measurement. The tooth appeared to be in remarkable condition, with a clean root and a distinct curvature. Though the catalog offered no details about where it had come from, the timing and the inscription suggested it might have once belonged to someone of royal rank. As the Cairo research team reviewed the images, one of the analysts remembered that the KV-60 mummy had a missing upper molar. The idea seemed too coincidental to ignore. They decided to perform a comparative scan. Using CT data from the mummy's skull, forensic specialists created a three-dimensional model of the jaw, highlighting the empty socket. The measurements were then compared to the tooth found in the box, every dimension aligned. The width, the angle, and even the wear pattern matched perfectly. To confirm, digital imaging experts ran an overlay simulation. The tooth was virtually placed into the CT model of the skull. It fit so precisely that even the fine grooves at the root line corresponded with the socket's imprint. The technicians ran the test again to eliminate error. The result was the same. It was a perfect fit. Forensic experts later called it one of the most conclusive identifications ever achieved through physical evidence. The connection between the box and the mummy was undeniable. The laboratory grew silent as the confirmation appeared on screen. After years of speculation, the unknown female mummy from KV-60 was no longer anonymous. She had a name. She was Hatshepsut, the long-lost pharaoh of Egypt's 18th dynasty. The discovery spread quickly. Within hours, official statements were prepared for the press. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities held a public announcement describing the identification as one of the most significant breakthroughs in modern archaeology. In the days that followed, the museum became a global focal point. Television crews arrived. Visitors gathered outside the gates hoping for a glimpse of history being rewritten. The find transformed what had once been considered an obscure mummy into a global scientific sensation. Forensic teams began preparing to take DNA samples to confirm her genetic ties to other royal mummies from the same dynasty. As preparations for the genetic analysis began, the researchers started to realize that the story might not end with identification. There could have been more hidden within her body than anyone expected. The mystery of Hatshepsut was no longer about who she was, but about what secrets she still carried in her cells. The body that waited. Once the tooth had confirmed the identity, the focus in the Cairo lab shifted from archaeology to biology. The team decided to carry out a full medical and genetic study to find out what her body could still tell them after more than 3,000 years. They began with advanced CT imaging. The scans revealed an older woman, likely in her early to mid-50s, with clear signs of dental decay, worn joints, and long-term illness. Her spine showed stress. Her knees showed degeneration. This was a woman who had lived in comfort but also in pain. The CT data showed something even more unusual. Her body was covered in thick layers of embalming resin. In many mummies, this destroyed DNA completely. In her case, the resin seemed to have sealed parts of her organs in a way that slowed decay. The liver area in particular appeared to be preserved better than expected. For the scientists, this was an opportunity. If any ancient genetic material had survived, it would have been in these protected spots. Under sterile conditions, biologists removed very small samples from bone and from the preserved soft tissue. Every tool was cleaned. Every surface was monitored. DNA specialists reminded the team that ancient Egyptian mummies were very difficult subjects. The climate, the oils, and the embalming materials usually destroyed genetic code. Contamination was a real threat, especially from modern human DNA. According to some of the staff present, the tension in the room was high. If the samples were contaminated, they might never have gotten another chance. The samples were taken to the genetics lab and run through several rounds of amplification. Days passed, then weeks. For a while, the monitors showed only noise. Then a faint sequence appeared on the screen. It was weak, but it was real. The scientists ran it again to confirm. The same signal appeared a second time. The mitochondrial profile showed that the woman belonged to the maternal line of the 18th dynasty. It matched genetic patterns identified in other tested royals, including Thutmose I and Amosi Nefertari. The team had proof that the body was not only Hatshepsut by tooth match, but also by bloodline. For a moment, there was relief. The mystery of identity was solved. But the data did not stop there. When the researchers studied the recovered fragments more closely, they noticed irregularities. Some of the markers were linked to metabolic problems. Other markers pointed to a possible inherited weakness in processing certain substances. According to some reports, this discovery troubled the medical experts. It suggested that Hatshepsut might have been living with chronic illness toward the end of her life. It also suggested that her body might have reacted badly to some of the ritual balms and cosmetics used in her court. The team realized that they were not only uncovering who had ruled Egypt, but also how that ruler's body had slowly failed. The tests deepened. What the team found inside her ancient cells left them speechless. The Code of Death. As the data continued to unfold, the scientists began to see a pattern forming in the results. The irregular markers found in her DNA hinted at something larger, a clue hidden in her biology that might explain her decline. To confirm it, the researchers expanded their focus beyond genetics and turned to the chemical residues preserved in her wrappings and burial items. Each fragment, each vial, became a piece of evidence. Somewhere within those samples, they believed, lay the true cause of Hatshepsut's death. They began with the genetic material taken earlier from her bones and from the preserved soft tissue. The first results showed that she belonged to the same maternal line as other rulers of the 18th dynasty. That confirmed again that she was a true royal. When the geneticists looked deeper, they found something more unusual. Some of the DNA fragments suggested that she had mutations that affected metabolism. In simple terms, her body had probably struggled to break down fats and sugars. People with that kind of condition often gain weight easily and may develop illnesses like diabetes. This matched what the scans had already shown. The medical specialists then returned to the imaging to compare the findings. The scans showed fat deposits near her liver and other organs. Her bones looked brittle for a woman of her age and rank. There were areas that looked like lesions. Several of these were consistent with cancer that had spread. According to some members of the team, the pattern suggested that she had not been poisoned by an enemy and had not died from a sudden attack. She had been getting sick over many years. The chemists examined a small alabaster vial found among artifacts believed to have belonged to Hatshepsut. Inside it was a trace of dried residue from a perfumed balm. In ancient Egypt, such balms were used by royals both as skin treatments and for ritual purification before temple ceremonies. Laboratory tests revealed that the residue contained a compound known as benzoapyrene, a substance modern science recognizes as highly toxic. It is commonly found in tar, smoke, and crude oil, and it is classified as a carcinogen, meaning it can trigger or accelerate the growth of cancer cells. The team compared the substance from the vial with traces that were found on her wrappings. The results were close enough for several researchers to suggest that she had used that balm more than once. Some of them believed she may have used it regularly as part of a purification routine. A single use might not have been dangerous, but when the scientists compared these findings with her DNA, they found signs of a rare enzyme variant. That variant would have made it harder for her body to remove toxic substances. A normal person might have been able to handle years of light exposure. Hatshepsut probably could not. At that point, the pieces lined up. She had a genetic weakness. She used a balm that contained a cancer-causing compound. She used it again and again because of her position and her devotion to ritual purity. Her body stored the poison instead of clearing it. Over time, her cells began to change. The lesions seen on the CT scans now made sense. She had not been killed by another ruler. She had been harmed slowly by her own practices. When the researchers understood this, the room became quiet. The queen who had ruled Egypt at its height and had claimed the favor of Amun was not destroyed by politics. She was destroyed by chemistry and by her own body. She had mastered her world, but she could not master this. As the shock settled, scholars began to ask what this discovery meant for the history of Egypt itself. The queen erased. When the results from the DNA and chemical tests were released, historians did not only celebrate the identification, they returned to the old question that had followed Hatshepsut for more than 3,000 years. Why had Thutmose III, the boy she once protected, tried so hard to wipe her from history after she died? For a long time, the answer had seemed simple. Most scholars believed it was politics. A female pharaoh had ruled in the place of a male heir, so the male heir later cleaned the record. But the medical findings about her body forced everyone to look again. The scans had shown obesity, advanced illness, and signs of cancer. That information made the story feel more personal. The traditional explanation still made sense. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III finally ruled alone. Egypt at that time was a kingdom that liked order and clear succession. A line of male kings made rulership look stable. A woman who had ruled as pharaoh could weaken that idea in the eyes of later generations. Removing her name from temples and carving his own over hers helped him present Egypt as a place where the crown passed smoothly from father to son. Destroying her images was a way to make sure future priests and officials did not have to explain why a woman once sat on the throne as king. However, some modern researchers who reviewed the new scientific data believed there was more behind it. They pointed out that Thutmose III had grown up in her shadow. She had ruled while he was still a child. She had worn the symbols of kingship. She had been shown in temples as chosen by Amun. According to these scholars, it was possible that he never forgot that. When scientists later revealed that her body had been swollen, sick, and probably in decline toward the end of her life, these researchers suggested that he might have seen this as proof that her kingship had not been blessed. Illness in a ruler was sometimes read as a sign that the gods had withdrawn favor. If he believed that, then erasing her after death was not only political, it was personal. Another theory built on this. Some historians argued that the destruction might have been carried out as a kind of purification. In this reading, Thutmose III was not acting only out of anger. He was trying to repair what he thought had been broken. By smashing her statues, burying her sphinxes, and cutting her name from stone, he was restoring Egypt to the form he believed was correct. A male king on the throne, a clean line of inheritance, a past without a woman presented as a god. To him, it may not have looked like cruelty. It may have looked like duty. The great irony came later. The same woman he tried to erase became the most famous ruler of his dynasty. Her image, once chipped away from temple walls, appeared again in books, films, and museum exhibits. Her body, which had been taken from the small tomb and placed in storage without ceremony, became the center of global research. Whatever the truth, her erasure was not complete. The same body that he tried to destroy now stood as the most studied queen in history. Her genome, her illness, her truth were all preserved. What Thutmose III may have seen as corruption, modern science called humanity. What he tried to bury had outlived every inscription he carved over her name. Her story raised a harder question. How many other rulers had been erased because someone after them felt threatened, disgusted, or determined to rewrite the record? How many women had ruled briefly and then disappeared from stone, but not from blood? Hatshepsut's return showed that history could be forced into silence for a time, but not forever. She proved that a body could speak even when its voice was removed from walls. What do you think her final story reveals? Was it vengeance from a son who never forgave? Was it a political cleanup? Or was it something far more human? Share your theory in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.